All right, you guys. Hi, I am Sadia. I'm the host of Talking Taste. Thank you. So this is our third Talking Taste, but our first really big public event, and it sold out. So I appreciate all of you guys coming here tonight on a Friday. If you guys brought drinks, now's the time to open your bottles and drink. We also have jungle juice in the back, if you guys remember that in college. I've already had a fair amount, so you guys are welcome to get drunk with me. So I want to just tell you a little bit about Talk and Taste. It is an event where we debate kind of spicy, controversial topics. This one is definitely one and very topical. And we have two lovely guests, which I will introduce in a moment. But I'm going to pass it off to our lovely co-host, Anthony Green. Everyone give it up for Anthony. Okay. I don't know if that one works, so we'll just have to share.
Hello? I think this is working.
Oh, it's working. Great.
I've been told to hold this just below my chin, but if my peas are popping, please let me know. Hello, everyone. We are here tonight to raise a question that we don't often raise in public, which is, should we have more babies? I'm sure that this is a topic that many of you have thought about in your private lives, but it's increasingly becoming a matter of public significance. On the one hand, there are those who worry about declining birth rates across the developed world. For instance, there are some estimates that say that South Korea is going to lose more than half of its population in the next 100 years. A lot of countries aren't far behind. On the other hand, there are those who worry about the effect of ballooning human populations on climate change. People ask questions like, is it moral to bring children into a world which we are rapidly making worse? And from a personal perspective, the issue is also becoming much more complicated. Women worry about political attacks on their reproductive autonomy. Prospective parents worry about the costs and time required to raise children, which seem to be rising faster than inflation and have for many decades, seemingly. There are many, many, many opinions on this topic, and if you've ever struggled with any of them, you are in very good company. We have brought you, primarily Sadia, two incredible thinkers who have agreed to represent both sides of this debate. If you've come confused, we hope that you leave confused, but confused at a higher level. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. There are two incredible thinkers. I'm going to start by introducing our representative from the antinatalist camp, Amanda Sukenick. She is the host of a very popular YouTube series, the Exploring Antinatalism Podcast, and co-author of Antinatalism, Extinction, and the End of Procreative Self-Corruption. Her books are up front if you guys want to check it out. She's actually flown all the way from Chicago, so welcome back to NYC because she is a New Yorker. And thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And to my right, we have our representative from the pronatalist camp, Travis Timmerman. He is the chair of the philosophy department at Seton Hall and co-author of Exploring the Philosophy of Death and Dying. Tonight, he'll be defending the pronatalist camp. Give it up for Travis. All right. So before we start, we have some ground rules. This is the topic, and I thought this was a great transition. Should we have more babies? Great title slide. So, more talking. One thing I want to know, this is a spicy topic, but it's definitely meant to be fun. Amanda and Travis are actually friends and they've known each other before this whole event, so just know that it's not gonna be like, they're not gonna like chew each other out. The other thing is keep drinking. This is meant to be social, and I want you guys to get really shit-faced by the end of this. And we'll just get rowdy. The idea of this is that we're gonna listen into these lovely speakers and then have a little party after. And we want you guys to laugh. This is a really serious topic, but it doesn't mean it has to be handled in a serious way. And also bathrooms. Bathrooms are interesting. So there is a bathroom. It is to the right. There is a bubble of water on the ceiling that's about to burst. But if you guys are willing to take an adventure, please do. The toilets are working, but it is the back to the right if you haven't seen it. All right, so I think I have all the things that I need to say. The poll. So I want to take a poll of how you guys feel about the topic. I had a fancy live poll situation going, but it is so technical and not working. So I'm going to ask you guys to scream. If you guys are in favor of, yes, we should have more babies on the side of Travis, I want you guys to scream. Okay, let's remember the volume of that scream because we're going to test that out at the end of this debate if your opinions have changed. Okay, now for the antinatalist side, if you guys are in the belief that no, we should not have more babies, I want to hear you guys scream. Oh, do we know who won that one?
I don't know.
Oh, wow, okay. I'm going to say pronatalist. Do you guys agree or no? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, okay. My ears are saying pronatalist. So let's remember that, and then at the end of the debate, we'll do another screaming match to see who won the argument. All right, so I have this fun graphic. Just thought it would be fun just to see them duke it out via PowerPoint. That's Amanda and Travis. And now we're gonna open the floor. So the way that tonight's gonna work is Amanda and Travis are gonna do opening statements, and then the rebuttals will happen where we're gonna ask them the hard questions. And you guys will also have an opportunity to ask some questions as well. And then we will close off with closing arguments, and then you guys decide on the winner. Does that sound great? Okay, so we are going to start with Amanda. Amanda, I'm going to ring the bell when it's close to time.
Okay.
But I know you have a long...
I'll tell you as fast as I can.
Yeah, 2x, just kidding. Do you have a time? Does your phone?
Would you like me to?
Yes, that would be lovely. Okay. When Amanda...
I will put it right. Whoops. Sorry. I'll just put it. It's 5 minutes.
We can... Yeah, we'll stretch the time here. You can give it to me, actually, because I have the bell. Okay. All right. And ready?
Yes.
And go.
Thank you, Sadia. Please let me start off by saying what an honor it is for me to be here. I have this opportunity to speak with you all at Talk and Taste today at the magnificent Hancock Foundation, defending the position of antinatalism to you all, and my esteemed opponent for this evening, Professor Travis Timmerman. Thank you so much to everybody involved. We should not have kids because when we create new lives, we open those lives up to sentience, the possibility of harm, the inevitability of causing harm, suffering, unnecessary risk, and the certainty of dying. Before procreation, we simply do not exist. There is no one there. Procreation performs no rescue mission. Being born pulls no one out of a prior state where they were screaming out to exist, where they were in need of a good life, or to have positive experiences. Before we exist, there is no suffering, there is no death. None of those things exist until somebody decides for us that they have a justification worthy enough to take the entirely unnecessary risk of producing a life that might not be worth living. What does exist before we are born are the notions, addictions, and desires swimming around in the heads of those that create us. Ideas about what life is, what meaning they might derive for themselves by creating us, and imposing the same need for meaning onto us, about who we might be, their hopes for what our future might look like, indeed, if they're even thinking about any of those things at all. Sometimes procreation can indeed have the very best of intentions behind it. To some, they truly believe that by procreating, they are giving a gift to their children, the gift of life. But in actual fact, those we create will not be us. They will be individuals, entirely new people who may not like the world you've brought them into. They may see your gift as a curse. They may not accept this imposition of sentience and suffering. What is music to your ears may be nails on a chalkboard to theirs. They may hate that your meaning had to be derived from their pain. They may hate it here. They may be miserable, and they may wish to die. How can this be ethical? How can we, without consent, and with lots of prior knowledge all around us regarding just how bad life can be, impose such extreme risks for the satisfaction of no real purpose other than the achievement of one's own selfish desires, life, onto the next unsuspecting generation? How can it possibly be ethical to create need for no need? Various flavors and whispers of this idea have existed throughout human history, but it had no name until very recently. We can find traces of this kind of thinking in ancient Greek philosophy, various Christian Gnostic sects like the Manichaeans, and by the mid-1970s and the early 1990s, all over the world, we began to see the advent of these ideas taking form within academic philosophy through such thinkers as Hermann Vetter, Julio Cabrera, Matti Haire, and Karima Kerma. But in 2006, the idea finally crystallized into the form of a book called Better Never to Have Been, The Harm of Coming into Existence by South African philosopher David Benatar. Amongst a host of extremely important advancements to the idea, at long last, Professor Benatar, along with Théophile Diderot, that same year, gave us the word that we now know and love for this concept today, antinatalism. Since that time, various forms of antinatalism, both academic and non-academic, have emerged, as well as the development of antinatalist art and activism. Since Benatar, the scope of what lives can have concern for antinatalists has also expanded, pushing far past only human lives, sometimes called anthropocentric antinatalism. And now it can exist for all sentient life, sometimes called sentient-centric antinatalism, and some even include the possibility of sentient machines, and further still. I think that it is very sad, it's a very sad circumstance when people don't get what they seem to want most out of life. And for some people, the most precious of things to be obtained, the thing that they cannot imagine securing a meaningful existence without, is to have children. And I sympathize, I really, really do. To spend one's life wanting children only for some creep to show up and tell them that it might be a very unethical thing to do for them to have them, and that perhaps they should abstain from procreation for the sake of themselves and for the child, is loss, it is sacrifice. And there is real sadness and mourning attached to that. And even I, who am an extinctionist antinatalist, who never wanted children, who believes that no one should ever have children, and believes that no lives should be produced again, is no stranger to those feelings. Last paragraph. But it matters who we create, and it matters how they come to self-report on the quality of their lives. And if they come to write a negative product review of the gift of life that you've given them, if your gift turns out to be something that they desperately wish that they could return, if your unlicensed biological experiment starts to feel like Frankenstein's monster, then perhaps you were unjust in imposing and playing God in the first place. And now I do believe it's time to hear what Travis has to say.
All right, Travis, why should we have kids?
Should I just talk like this, or?
Oh, yeah, there you go. You can take my mic.
I like having mic, so. I have 5 minutes.
Yeah.
first, thanks to everyone for coming out. Thanks to Sadia for organizing this. Thanks to everyone that was involved in organizing this. And I'd like to thank Amanda. I'm defending what's going to be a fairly common, intuitive philosophical view that it's okay, indeed often good, to have children. But I don't think that is an easy thing to do, because a general feature of the way that philosophy works is things that seem very commonsensical, things that seem very obvious, upon reflection often turn out not to be, and in many cases turn out to be false. So this is a case where I think the common sense position stands up to scrutiny, but I do really appreciate people like Amanda holding our feet to the fire and making sure that we have good reasons to defend our view. So thank you for that. The case for antinatalism, I can already tell. What I'm going to say is not going to be as eloquent or energetic as anything that Amanda says. I'm more monotone. But the case, which fits the position that I'm going to give, the case for pronatalism, I think, is very simple. Lives that have net good in them, or more whatever you think is good, happiness, then bad, suffering, is good for the beings that live it. And if it's good for the beings that live it, I think that makes the world better. The more happy lives we have, overall happiness, the better the world is. The more net bad lives we have, the worse the world is. I think it's good to have children because in many cases relative to our evidence, I think we can reasonably believe that the children that we create are going to have lives that are on the whole good, and I think that's going to make the world better, all else equal. Now, of course, there's a variety of complex situations that we're going to have to deal with, where I'm not going to be of the view that it's always, under any circumstance, permissible to have kids. But I also don't think even the strongest pronatalists are going to make take such a strong position. One last thing to say in favor of it is any sort of risk that you incur by having children, that Amanda just pointed out, I think there is a symmetrical risk in failing to have children. So you could, in having a child, you risk having somebody that is going to have a net bad life, or cause somebody to come into existence maybe further down the line, generations later, that are going to have a net bad life. But in failing to have a kid, you incur a risk of failing to create somebody who would have had a net good life and would have made the world better. Now, I don't think it's wrong to fail to have kids, but I do think that's a risk that you're taking that's going to detract from the overall value of the world. So when we're deciding whether to have kids, we're looking at the probabilities that they're going to make the world better or worse. And I just am of the view, for reasons that we're going to get into, that in most instances, many people are going to be able to have children and reasonably expect that they're going to be producing net good in doing so. I don't know how that was on time, but I think I came in under. So.
That was amazing, yeah. Woo!
All right, so we are now going to get to the meat of this, which is we'll ask some questions. We'll get some back and forth going on. So our first question, do you want me to ask both questions simultaneously or?
Let's start with Travis.
Okay. Travis, you stated that you are on the pronatalist side of things. In a perfect pronatalist world, what does that world look like? You said, for instance, that there is, a risk in not creating life, that you might deprive someone that could have had a good existence of having that existence. Does that mean that there's an endless amount of population growth that we need? Are people required to have as many kids as possible? What is the perfect world?
Yeah, that's a good question. So certainly not an endless population growth. There's going to be some capacity at which the world is going to get worse because life is not going to be sustainable on that. What that capacity is, I don't know, and it's probably a moving target because it's going to depend on a number of other variables, right? So are we eating non-human animals that we're producing in factory farms in very carbon-intensive ways? If so, then that capacity is going to be much lower than if we're eating a plant-based diet. Are we expanding to other planets in ways that are habitable in the maybe not so distant future? If so, then maybe it'll be higher. What's the actual physical size of people? What sorts of carbon-intensive things do they do with their money, and what sorts of things do they not do? That's all going to affect how much life can be sustained on a planet. So no, definitely not endless. it would be optimal to get as close as you can to the limit without disastrous effects. But how close you get to the limit or what the limit is will be dependent on a variety of other factors. The perfect pronatalist world is not one that we live in, right? It's one, I think, where people have the ability to have children if they want to and have the social and government infrastructure in place that would allow them to make that choice in the least risky way, right? So that's going to mean like access to hospitals that are well staffed with doctors that'll that'll provide them with the medical care that they need without risking incurring huge medical bills that could put them in debt for a long time depending on what their insurance situation is and what their out-of-pocket costs are. It means having access to mental health care when you risk postpartum depression. It means having access to childcare that's affordable. It means all of these things. And if we had that, which would be a huge sort of social change from what we have now, then we'd be in a place where people would want to increase their population, I think a non-trivial amount, and do so in a way that is a fully autonomous choice on their part.
I'm going to go off script. I do have a question.
Yeah.
Generally right now, countries are all declining in population. And in that case, when you're saying that based off of the resources that we got to make sure that we have enough resources for everyone, isn't that a more positive outlook in having this declining population? Because right now, our hospitals are overrun. It's hard to survive with a family at this rate. Is that a positive calculation in how we're managing population control?
Yeah, good question. So there's two things to say about that. First, the perfect pronatalist world is sort of thinking about what's optimal and then how close could we get to that. We're not going to get there. And then we can ask a question about what we should do in light of where we are now and what's feasible to get to. So I was just outlining what the optimal case was. As far as population, my understanding is that birth rates have continued to decrease for roughly the last 20 years in the US, but the population of the US has continued to increase. It's just increasing at a smaller rate than it was. Why is it doing that? Am I not holding it close enough or too far away? I don't know.
You gotta pop your peas.
Yes, I gotta pop my peas. So my understanding is that the population of the US is increasing, but at a smaller rate than it was before, and the global population is increasing exponentially. Just in the last 200 years, we went from 1 billion people on Earth to 8 billion people on Earth, and that doesn't look like it's going to change. So it's a collective action problem for why we don't have the proper medical care for everybody who needs it. But we have the ability to do that. We have enough people, they could work together in the right sort of way to create this if they wanted to, but we need to have the proper incentives in order to make that happen. That's not going to happen, but it's worth thinking about what the optimal outcome is and then seeing how close we could get to that optimal outcome.
Got it. And Amanda,
Yes.
in a perfect antinatalist world, what does that world look like? And do you want humans to go extinct?
Yes.
Sure.
A perfect antinatalist world, by my estimation, would be a world in which no sentient life, or indeed any life at all, existed or had the potential to exist. Mars is currently a perfect antinatalist planet. Nothing is suffering, nothing is feeding off of one another, nothing is in need, nothing is being manipulated, and nothing is in harm's way. Better still, would be a world in which life had never arose in the first place. Before sentience, before DNA, an antinatalist may often see the emergence of these things as the first and greatest of tragedies on planet Earth. While the time in history we are currently living in right now may be a particularly bad time to have kids, it was in fact never a good time for life to arise on this planet, because suffering and the inability that life seems to have to be free of these negatives is unacceptable. The negatives are built down into the very core of what life itself is. To the second part of your question, yes, I do want humans to go extinct. In fact, I want the manufacturing, creation, birth, procreation, what have you, of all of life, particularly sentient life, to cease. But that is far easier said than done on a planet with an ever-increasing number of living things already on it, all which who possess autonomy and who find the idea of life ending to be abhorrent. For human beings, the problem is in relative terms is not really so difficult. People can be educated, reasoned with, and though it may take a great deal of time and may in fact be impossible, the task of the antinatalist is to somehow convince, speak to people, to the human race to simply stop producing itself and to go quietly into that good night. The problem of extinctionist antinatalism starts to become a great deal more complicated when we start to consider sentiocentric antinatalism. Human beings create and cause immense suffering to billions of animals for the sake of our own pleasure, the greatest example of which is industrialized factory farming, something that I think Travis and I can both agree is one of the worst things on this planet that's ever existed. So it's not uncommon that antinatalists are vegan, are impassioned animal rights activists, and would be for the extinction of those species. Wild animals, however, are a far different circumstance for many antinatalists because we did not have a hand in creating them. And the debate on the extinction, the debate on if the extinction of human beings means that we have extinctionist duties to either prevent or to end the lives of wild animals before the one animal on planet Earth who could do something about it ethically and peacefully is gone forever, is amongst one of the most hotly controversial subjects under the entire creed. Now, to be fair to the width and breadth of antinatalist thinking, not all antinatalists are extinctionists. Some, like the transhumanist antinatalist David Pierce, believe that extinctionist antinatalism will fail for a variety of reasons, and that we should instead be setting our sights towards bioengineering the human genome to eradicate suffering, thus creating gradients of bliss hitherto unknown, and therefore making procreation almost done, ethical and life worthy of continuing. I personally don't hold out much hope for this as a solution, and I still believe that even without suffering in Kantian terms, it would still be unethical to manipulate these new beings being produced. There are also others who believe in things like life extensionism. Perhaps we don't need to go extinct at all. Maybe we could just give Aubrey de Grey lots and lots of money, and he will figure out how to make us live forever, and in exchange, we just don't produce new people. Or perhaps we could all collectively enter a full immersion virtual reality, and we could just play the best video game ever for eternity, have all of our darkest desires satiated, and no one would need to be born then, at least nobody real. For me, I do believe that I will stick with extinctionism. Better to end the suffering as we know it than chance the horrors of making it worse, which I believe all of these other solutions have the potential to unfortunately cause.
So I'm going to actually reverse things. So I'm going to ask you a follow-up, and then I'm interested in your take. This is maybe phrased a little bit provocatively, but a lot of your argument relies on the risk of harm, the risk of bringing people into bad lives. Mm-hmm. What's so bad about suffering? Just to give very briefly an intuition for this, I think a lot of people have known people in their lives who went through very hard lives, who nonetheless feel some sort of journey has been accomplished. There's a Frank Sinatra song, regrets I've had a few, but I did it my way.
Right.
It's a very common type of human sentiment. People are proud of their scars. What is so bad about suffering that we have to avoid it?
Well, I think that as individuals, we can certainly accept our own suffering, right? Like we may come to experience certain things, they cause us great negativity, but we strive past that. We build something better towards it. We build character. But the fact of the matter, those that we create are not going to be us. They might not accept or have the same gumption to react to the suffering in the same way. What might give you strength, what might write a new chapter of greatness in your life might utterly destroy those that you create. So suffering is, in very subjective terms, might be absolutely nothing for one individual. It might be everything to some other individual. And by not procreating, by not forcing somebody into existence, I'll say all this later, but you take the fail safe. Because yes, you may create that human being that will go on to greatness, that can overcome suffering, but you might be doing exactly the opposite. And what right do you have to play God in that sense?
On the same note, do you need a child's life to be more pleasure than pain for it to be worthwhile? And if a child's life is more pain than pleasure, is that child's life worth creating? Do we have a right to bring a child into a world that will cause them more suffering than pleasure?
Yeah, good question. So it doesn't need more pleasure than pain to be worthwhile. Because I understand worthwhile to be a broad concept that could mean their life is good for them and their life is good for others. So people could have lives that contain a lot more suffering than pleasure. I'm not sure what the calculus for, say, Nelson Mandela was, but plausibly he suffered more than he got pleasure. And his life was still worthwhile because of the good that he did for other people. But a life does need more prudential good, to use a philosophical term, things that are good in itself for the person that's living it. It needs more prudential good than bad in order for that life to benefit the person that's living it. If their life has more bad in it, things that are bad in and of themselves, whatever you think that amounts to, if it's pain, if it's desire, frustration, if it's failure, if it's enemies, if it's lack of accomplishment, whatever you think in and of itself makes life bad, if there's more of that than what's good, then that life is not going to be good for the being that's living, in my view. But it could be worthwhile in other respects. What right do we have to create such lives? Well, if the life is good for the being that's living it, I think that's all else equal morally permissible to do. It's good for them, it's going to make the world better. I don't think you need anything else to justify that beyond that sort of benefit. What about creating a life that's bad for the being living it, but maybe good for others? I think the justification for that would come from the good that the other people's interests mattered just as much. Everybody's interests mattered the same way to the same degree. So if enough people have a sufficiently strong interest in a being coming into existence, I think it can be permissible to create such a being. But those will be, I think, primarily hypothetical cases. And the cases that we're dealing with are ones where we think quite reasonably that the being that's going to come into existence is going to have a net good life. They just can't consent to that life before they live it.
All right, so we're going to move on to the next question, and this one is for you, Travis. I'm really putting you in the hot seat. I'm going to get a little spicy here for a second because this is a critical part of the pronatalist argument right now in the world of Elon and J.D. Vance. The U.S. is currently averaging around 1.6 births per woman, well below the replacement rate of 2.1. So Travis, if you were to throw on your Elon hat for a moment, can you unpack this argument a bit? He thinks that because of this, this is a major threat to civilization as we know it. And to even take it further, considering the U.S. is getting outpaced in birth rates by countries such as India and Africa, why should Americans care? What's really at stake here?
Yeah, so first I'd never want to wear Elon's hat. Just want to be clear about that. So, yes, getting that mindset, it's true that if the population replacement rate continues to decline, if that happens worldwide, then you'll have fewer people that can work together to produce good. And then that can strain various things, including the economy. If the population gets increasingly older on average, which is happening in the US right now, because of the baby boomer generation, they were just much larger millennial, like me, even though I'm an old millennial, but still technically a millennial, and then generations that come after, as that replacement rate decreases, then the generation, even though our population in the US is getting larger, it's going to get older on average. And then if people retire and they're not in the workforce, that can put a strain on the economy, and that's going to change the incentive structure for people in all sorts of ways. So that could be bad, potentially bad. That's something that Elon Musk is worried about. As far as other countries having a higher population rate, I think one thing that is not a cause for concern in light of this is we could draw talent in from those countries by having incentives to get them to emigrate here and study here and take jobs here and do all sorts of things that would improve our country. That's not what they're in fact doing, but they could do that. And then the decreasing birth rate shouldn't be that much of a concern. He might have, to be maximally charitable, concern about certain undemocratic countries gaining more power in the world, and then that could have a net bad effect. So there's no reason to be concerned about Asian populations in themselves getting larger, but if it's China getting larger and that's exerting a larger influence in the world, and they do things that exploit people in various ways, or they could team up with or form alliances with people like Trump who have authoritarian tendencies, that could be a really bad, that's not Elon Musk worried, but that could have a really bad effect in the world. But my view is that we shouldn't care about this at all, except insofar as it changes the overall net good. So there's some people that Elon Musk hasn't said this, although he sort of alluded to things on Twitter. But there's people who like Elon Musk and sort of worship him, for lack of a better term. And their reasons are just like blatantly racist. They're concerned about their culture dying out in favor of some other culture that's foreign to them. And I just think that is a completely misguided and objectionable set of attitudes to have. Should only care about these demographics insofar as they change the overall net goodness of the world, which I just am going to cash out in terms of well-being. How many happy lives are there, human and non-human animal?
Amanda.
Yes.
So a lot of what you've talked about is about, the ethical risk of forcing an unborn creature into existence. But Travis raises an interesting question, which is that a lot of the structures that we rely on in society actually rely in many cases on births. We need the young to take care of the elderly, and it's possible that, for instance, if we stop having kids, like that last generation of humans are going to have pretty horrible lives as they work themselves until the end of their lives, and all these things that we take for granted, retirement, enjoying your life as it comes to a close, are just going to come to an end. How do you think about that with respect to your position that we should stop having kids?
Sure. Yeah, I will kind of jump ahead and read what I wrote in relation to another question that I think answers this pretty well. While I think that we should stop having children, I think that should be an eventual goal, not an immediate one. If humanity chooses antinatalism to be the future, ethical extinctionism, I believe, has to be a gradual course of action. This is not dissimilar to what David Benatar proposes as phased extinction. Under this plan, those that wish to keep having children may do so, and gradually the number of new lives would decrease and we would slowly go extinct. To stop, full stop, even though that's what I would prefer, even though doing so necessitates the creation of new lives, not allowing it to be done that way, not allowing for reproductive freedom would inevitably cause a lot of suffering. And if that can be avoided by going slowly, but I'm not using my, by allowing the final curtain to close at a more phased pace, then so be it. And in doing so, we could also have time to attend to what I feel to be our other responsibilities before we are gone, namely what is to be done about the existence of other sentient life forms. So if this was up to me, my vote would be on phased extinction. The end of humanity must be something carefully planned, carefully orchestrated, and carefully engineered so that it causes as little harm and suffering as possible as we decline. I think that antinatalism has a way of opening up wide a lot of the failures, these pre-existing social systems we have in place. We tell ourselves this lie that that we will have children and they'll take care of us when we're old, for instance. But that is so not the case. Nursing homes are filled with people that have tons and tons of kids, and those kids may not have any contact with those parents. They don't care for those parents. Children are not the insurance end-of-life care plan that they're promised to be. And the idea that we should be producing children for this purpose in the first place, in my opinion, lays bare the fact that senior care is not well served and needs serious rethinking. And again, I think antinatalism makes that even clearer, that fact even clearer. If DOGE and the Trump administration does end up ending Social Security, for instance, I think the failure of some of these systems we currently have will be tested, and assuredly catastrophic results will ensue. Many states in America have filial laws, which means that seniors will, if they're no longer receiving their life-sustaining SSA checks every month, it will be the responsibility of their children to care for and support them, a burden that most don't want, can't take on emotionally, financially, what have you, and which should not be expected of them in the first place. So yes, I think we produce a ton of lives. We have all this expectation that it's going to uphold the systems that we have in place. I don't think that works to begin with. And the fact of the matter is people are choosing to have less children. And so it should be a society that tries to acclimate to that rather than the other way around.
I guess the question, this is a follow-up. You're mentioning extinction. If everyone dies in the end, what purpose does that serve? Like, who are we serving if there's no one with sentience left?
Well, it feels like we're losing something, right? Because we're addicted to life. We're addicted to the existence. We think we have this idea that this has to exist. We have to have new blockbuster films come out. We have to have new talking tastes. We have to have all these things. But the fact of the matter is we don't. There is nothing that all of this actually serves. Especially particularly if you're an atheist, I mean, there's no greater purpose that the existence of any of this serves. So sentience, we know, causes a tremendous amount of suffering, and there's a mirage out there of taking these chances, taking these risks with producing suffering, and that it might produce something good. That's gambling. That's gambling with somebody else's welfare for very little gain, in my opinion, for absolutely no reason, to serve no purpose, to serve no grander scheme than our selfish desires. So again, I think that what matters is that on our way down, if again we choose this as the future of humanity, that it be done in a way that it doesn't produce exponential suffering, doesn't make things worse. That's the real value of sentience, that it has to be, that it's this precious thing that we have to take care of. But does the world need it? Does anybody need it? We certainly don't start out that way. We don't need it before we exist. And there will be nothing that is crying out for it to exist again once we are inevitably gone. Because whether people choose antinatalism or not, extinction is inevitable. We will go extinct. This is all very temporary anyway. So,
just one small point of order. I want to ask the audience their opinion on one statement made. Do we need more talking tastes?
Absolutely. Talking tastes will exist in the universe, and that will be very important. Things served.
Yeah.
There's an interesting question to me the center of all of this is that whenever we think of the value of having kids, just like empirically, last 150 years, second people had the opportunity not to have infinite kids, they seem to have many fewer of them. Pretty much every place on earth has a cratering birth rate. Even the places with high birth rates, the birth rate relative to what it was 30 years ago is cratering. You know, Nigeria, I think, went from like 14 to 5 or something in the last 2 decades. Don't quote me on those numbers. So, Travis, from your perspective, and I recognize this is a difficult question, but I'm interested in what you have to say. Why are women having fewer kids now? And what would encourage people, if you think they should be encouraged, to have more?
Yeah, so it's a complex empirical question. There's some like general trends that you point to. You mentioned 150 years ago, people had more children then because there were higher infant mortality rates and you needed to have kids to help out on the farm. And so that, there wasn't as much access to healthcare. There were fewer people going to college. They were having kids earlier. There was a stronger social norm. I mean, there's just a series of complex social factors that make it the case that they were having more children then. That's different now. More people are going to college. They're waiting until they're older to have kids. The cost of having kids has increased. I think the social pressure to have kids has decreased, which is probably a good thing because that was putting pressure on people to have kids who didn't want to have kids. So that's just going to scratch the surface about why people are having fewer kids now. There's general demographic trends. When you see that countries get richer, people tend to have fewer kids. When they have access to education and birth control, they tend to have fewer kids. Not particularly surprising. Should we encourage them to have more kids? Yes, insofar as it's going to make the world better, and then we can incentivize the people who want to do it to choose to do so of their own volition and make it as easy as possible for them to. All right. So there's a bunch of different ways that you could try to do that. There's a bunch of different ways to approach the situation. I'm not sure which one is the best, or which set of incentives is the best. But what I would want generally is for people to be informed about the relevant options and informed about the risk that they're taking, have those risks minimized, and then make it feasible for them to have kids if they want to, regardless of the financial situation, and then have it not be stigmatized to choose to refrain from having kids if they don't want to. And if we did that, I still think we could get the population increase that would make the world better than it would be otherwise, and then we would avoid the downsides of having to stigmatize people who just want to autonomously choose to not have kids. And that's, that should be totally fine.
Do you agree with the $5,000 tax credit that Trump has instituted?
Yeah, he floats a new idea every day. That one is something that other countries have done. Do I agree with it? I don't have the sort of knee-jerk disapproval of it that many of my fellow liberal friends seem to have. There's a sense in which I think there's not anything that's inherently objectionable about offering $5,000 tax credit for having kids. I think that's very unlikely to do much to move the needle in the number of people that are having kids in the US. If anything, it's sort of, for those who were refraining from doing it because they thought that the out-of-pocket medical cost would be a little bit too high for them to take on, $5,000 might put them over the edge to make that decision to do that. But whether I ultimately support it would depend on looking at the range of different proposals that are available and the benefits and drawbacks of each of those. And I haven't done that. And I don't think Trump has done that either. Just floats a new thing out each day. That sort of sounds good on paper. But the short answer is I don't find that inherently objectionable. There could be a case for it that I think I would potentially support, but it would depend upon other options available to us.
Thank you very much. I'm actually just regardless of whether you think it's good or bad,
Yeah.
why do you think women aren't having as many kids?
Look, I think women want to be people. And they want lives of their own. They want all the same freedoms to explore and solve problems and to achieve the things that men have, and that's what we should be encouraging them to do, to live their lives to the fullest. There is every reason to give women the freedom to make procreative choices, all the choices. There is absolutely no reason to encourage women to have children. The world is teeming with lives in need of comfort and love, and it would be good if men and women were encouraged to serve the needs of those already here, as opposed to the creation of new lives. I think antinatalism as it exists today has in large part kind of been failing women, because it's extremely male-dominated. The old saying is antinatalism is for boys and the child-free movement is for girls. And there's many reasons why that's kind of played out that way, which I won't get into now. But I think that there are very few there are very few women who are openly sort of vocal about this subject at all. There's only one antinatalist female philosopher, for instance, Patricia McCormack. And so I think that that's left us a rather huge gap. For many women, the ability to incubate a fetus is paramount to their identity of being a woman. And women's rights have been under attack for so long, and it's not hard to see how women would be suspicious of a philosophy that is mainly articulated by men, that espouses that this wondrous womb thing may actually be pretty dangerous, and that pro-choice is actually always anti-choice from the perspective of the child being produced. This is very difficult messaging. And it's a real challenge for antinatalists to find a way of speaking to women on the subject in a way that is understandable and inoffensive. But let me just also say, I think that you're always on the right side of history to make it safe for women to have children if that's what they decide to do. Women should be given those choices, even though it takes all the choice away from the child being produced. But I don't think that that's what we should be encouraging women to do. I think we should be encouraging women to live their lives of their choosing. More than that, in this current political climate, just to answer sort of something about the $5,000 and whatever, I would be extremely suspicious of the motives behind anybody that is actively encouraging people to have children. Travis excluded, of course. Natalism is vulnerable right now. It is being wielded as a tool of nationalism and futurism. And again, I know that sounds very hyperbolic, but these people want you to pay for their administration in the flesh, blood, sweat, tears of your children, their labor. They don't want your children to have health care. They don't want your children to be well educated. They don't want your children necessarily have happy lives. They want a technocratic white ethno-state. And it's a party that very few of us are invited to, and it's a party that needs fresh, warm bodies to fund its existence. Don't let them have that satisfaction. Don't hand these people your children for the sake of their ill motives. Don't pay for their fun in your daughters and sons. Woo!
Well, Travis, on that note, so I do encourage you to put on your Elon hat again. Just coming off the heels of what Amanda said, I'm just going to throw some stats on here. The suffering a mother endures after having children often extends far beyond the delivery room, shaping nearly every aspect of her life. Mental health challenges are widespread in the U.S. Just some stats. 1 in 5 mothers experience maternal mental health disorder, such as depression, anxiety, even psychosis. Globally, about 13% of women who have just given birth develop a mental disorder, with rates even higher in developing countries. Suicide and overdose are now leading causes of maternal death in the first year after childbirth. And beyond statistics, mothers often face relentless fatigue, guilt, anxiety, and a profound sense of isolation, sometimes struggling to bond with their babies or care for themselves, while societal expectations and lack of support can deepen their suffering. This is a very sad question. So the silent crisis underscores the immense, often invisible burden mothers carry throughout their lives after childbirth. Travis, I know this is a very loaded question, but I am interested in, like, if Elon was in the room with us, like, how do you justify promoting higher birth rates when it causes so much suffering to women? As the white male in the room.
Yes. I'm happy to speak to all these women's issues as the white male in the room. So I think there's a couple things to say. So, one thing is are we promoting higher birth rates with all of these other things health fixed? I wouldn't cash out my position in that way. I don't know how I would cash out Elon Musk's position, but a reasonable person, and insofar as Elon Musk is reasonable about this thing, what one would want to say is what they're advocating for is higher birth rates in conjunction with changing these conditions to try to minimize that problem while providing that relevant information about the risk that's going to be incurred, because you're not going to be able to completely eradicate it. And then let people make informed choices about what they want to do in light of the realities of the situation that they find themselves in at that point. So you're not going to be able to probably not going to be able to completely eradicate the risk of postpartum depression, but you can take steps to minimize it. You can try to figure out how to treat it. You can try to make sure that people have access to mental health care, to a support network, to try to curb that problem, and then provide the most sort of like up-to-date relevant data to people when they're deciding whether they want to have kids themselves. That's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is anytime that we focus on risk, it's worth thinking about the things that we risk by failing to do that. And if we're producing lives that are on the whole net good, that make the world better, that has to be factored into the overall calculation about whether this is a policy that's worth pursuing, or whether, if you're talking about a couple deciding to have children, that this is a choice that's good for them to make. That has to be weighed against any sort of risk that they incur, which does fall disproportionately on the person that has to give birth.
But on that note, given the stats that I've listed out, it's clear that there is a lag, right? There's this world where women get all the support they need, men are equally involved, but that's not the world we live in, and maybe I'm being a pessimist. I don't foresee that happening in the next 5 years. If anything, it might get worse. So in that situation, like, is that convincing, or should we convince women to have more babies in the fact that systems aren't supporting her right now?
Yeah, so there's different levels at which we can talk about this. We can talk about what individuals should do, and then we can talk about what groups should do, and we can talk about what the policy should be, and we can talk about how to incentivize them. So the general policy that I favor is one that would allow people to make highly individualized choices given what's best for them and the expected goodness of having the kid in question. And that is, I think, feasible. It is feasible to get this information disseminated in the right sort of way so that people can think about the situation that they're in. I wouldn't want a blanket statement of like, women should have more children. that is the scope of that is far too much, and it would generate the sort of bad outcomes that you're pointing to with respect to that situation. But the policy of providing the relevant information to people to let them make decisions for themselves, they can then look at that and then assess the evidence and then decide whether that's a risk that they want to incur. So, I mean, this is something that my wife and I did when we decided to have a kid. We have a 2.5-year-old now, and this is something that we thought about for almost 20 years because we've been together for a very long time before we had a kid. So this is something that we took quite seriously. You can look at general statistics, but it would be too quick to infer from general statistics that that's your chance, right? You can look at sort of features that make people more or less likely to be susceptible to postpartum depression. You can look at family history, you can talk to your family about what they went through when they had kids. She can talk to her mother about that and her siblings, and then get a more fine-grained assess of risk there. She can take steps to try to mitigate those effects if it happens. She can, and in spite of that, she can and did decide that it was worth incurring that risk in order to have a kid for the good, she thought, of the kid, and for the overall good that it would prevent her, the joy of being a parent, the positives and the downsides. So I don't know, I hope that I answered your question directly. And the point is, I wouldn't want to make a general policy blanket statement like that. I'd want some policy that's going to allow people to make fine-grained decisions in light of what's best for them.
I guess, and maybe I'm getting progressively more drunk. I guess the question I have for you then is, say for example for me,
Yeah.
if I had a high chance of suffering from postpartum depression,
Yeah.
my genetics tell me I'm going to be a very sad mother, and maybe my child will be really depressed too.
Mhm.
Should I have a kid?
Well, I need to know more than that.
Okay.
So, in general, I think people that suffer from depression most likely have net positive lives.
Okay.
So I don't think that would provide reason for you, moral reason against having a kid. It would just be weaker moral reason to have the kid. If you think the depression is so bad, the likelihood of that is so bad that the life is going to be on the whole negative, then I think that provides very strong moral reason for you to not have a child in that case. With respect to postpartum depression, want to know, like, how likely is it, and what form did it take, and what sorts of things you can, one might be able to do to mitigate the effects of that? How long would it last? How much good do you think you would get from having a kid versus how much good you would get from doing the other things that you could do with the time and resources that it takes to have and raise a child? And then I'd want you to be able, like for anybody, to decide what's best for you and then act in light of that.
We have put Travis through a little bit of a ringer. So I don't know actually what the answer to this question is going to be from you, Amanda, but I believe you said that you were very in favor of the right to end one's own life, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yep.
And a lot of what we've been talking about, some of Travis's arguments rely on this question of, like, essentially what is the individual's responsibility to others,
Yeah.
Let's say there's a mother or a parent and they don't like their lives and their lives are suffering and they would like to take their own life. Do they have an obligation to their family not to?
Yeah, I mean, examples like that do give me a little bit of pause. I mean, I have to say. I mean, I absolutely believe in the right to not exist, but I also believe in the right to no longer exist. I do think that it should be seen as a human right to have access, reasonable access, given upon request for the right to end your life. Now, to be able to have the freedom to exercise that right without having some negative consequence on your loved ones, I mean, I sadly do think that might be asking a little too much of the situation. It's always going to hurt to lose people that you love. I've lost countless people to suicide. I know it sucks. It's awful. But continuing to live for those individuals was worse. And that to me is what matters, that they got to choose what they wished. I think what really sucks now is the circumstance that we have at the minute, that people that want to die have to either end their lives in secret, they're forced to choose methods that are not reliable, that end up doing great harm to them before they die. I've had lots of friends in that circumstance, unfortunately. It's absolutely awful. We don't give people the dignity of closing out their time on Earth by, having a party, saying goodbye to the people that they love, making arrangements. But you do have these circumstances, like you bring up, like the mother, like a parent and child, or perhaps in another extreme case, you have somebody that may have like a cure for cancer. Like, it's incredibly it would be a tragedy if that person didn't fulfill that part of their destiny by giving us their solution before they ended their life. And I get that completely. I think what we have a responsibility, I think the responsibility that we have to people is to give people options and allow people to make a plan. I think that somebody in a circumstance of like whether they're a parent or whether there's some genius that has some something that humanity needs, they should be able to say, I'm giving you this amount of time. If I can give it, and then beyond that, I gotta go. I can't stay here because people didn't ask to be here in the first place. I do think that the responsibilities that they incur while living, I mean, it's not like those mean nothing. But I think that society has to have the correct amount of compassion to, one, allow those people to make real end-of-life plans while also allowing people through that plan for the end of their life to make arrangements. That's one of the other things that is denied to us when we are denied the right to die, is that, if you're a parent and you gotta go, right now, that kid is just gonna be, there's no plan. There's no ability to make a plan. They're either going to throw you in a mental institution or you're going to die in a closet or I'm sorry to make a joke out of it. It's not funny, but I mean, it is really the circumstance that we're in right now. So I just think that this needs to be a much more open conversation. We need people to be able to make arrangements so that their loved ones do receive the care, even if it doesn't come from them. And I think we have to let people go, because right now what we do is endless amounts of suffering, endless amounts of therapy and fixing, and there's never just like a no mas point where like we let them go. And we need that. People need that, in my opinion.
Thank you, Amanda.
Mm-hmm.
So we are gonna have one more question, then we're opening it up to the audience. Travis, you have a 2-year-old, and you mentioned that it took a bit of time to make the decision to have a child. I guess I would love to know what your perspective is in actually deciding, yes, I do want a kid, and how that kind of was informed by your outlook in the future and where life is at right now. Any sort of detail around what went into your personal decision making.
Yeah, sure. So there was a lot. Part of it was concerns about whether there is more reason to adopt a kid who already exists and give them a good life rather than create new life. And for a while I thought that there was. But now that I think if you just produce more happiness, then it's okay either way to do either thing. It might even make the world better to create an extra happy kid if the child that is not adopted still has a net positive life. There's considerations of my and my partner's career. We wanted to be able to have our careers. We wanted to be able to go to college. We wanted to be able to be financially prepared to have a kid. And I live in New York, and taking care of our kid right now is $50,000 a year, which is a lot of money for me anyway, because I'm a philosopher and they don't pay very well. So, we wanted to be prepared for that. We wanted to think about the other things that we could use that money on, and the cost of properly taking care of a child while being able to keep your careers is so enormous that money could be used to do other things that would also be very good and probably produce much more good in the world. You could save many more lives with that money than you could by spending it on your own children, which gave us significant pause. Questions about the way that the world is going was something that we thought about. I actually don't think there's much to that worry, but we're talking about the effects of global warming and geopolitics and how that might shape the world that our child would grow up in, and trying to make sure that, at least relative to our evidence, she would likely have a net positive life, which I still think was the case when we decided to have her.
Thank you. And now for Amanda. I know you are very much deep in the antinatalist community, and if anything, a leading voice in the movement, I would say. What kinds of experiences have shaped you and your colleagues' worldview?
Yes. So first off, let me say that antinatalists are no monolith. What might compel one antinatalist to start thinking this way is not at all the same that might move another. Antinatalists have been shaped by many different things in the past, present, and many things now are shaping antinatalists of the future. Personally, I never wanted children. I wanted to be myself. I had a mostly very happy childhood, a mostly very happy life. I was born here in New York on Long Island in Manhasset. My mother was a psychoanalyst and my father was an advertiser and oil painter. On the outside, particularly through my early childhood, I was a very cute, creative, emotionally precocious, blue-eyed, blonde hair. My hair's brown now, but I was blonde as a child. Little girl. But inside, I was always under a certain amount of duress. And this stemmed from several dimensions. The first thing was the idea that life could be or become something awful, not worth living, not worth starting, was never far away from my reality. My mother's side of my family is Armenian, and my father's side was Jewish. So I had genocide on both sides of my family. I grew up hearing stories like how my maternal great-grandmother, little Nena, who was alive until I was about 7 or 8, actually, she had to pretend she was dead in a pit of corpses for days in order to avoid herself being murdered by Turkish soldiers. And I looked at my then blonde hair and my blue eyes, and I knew that, like, Armenians didn't usually have those kinds of features. Nobody in my family had them. Nobody on my father's side of the family had them. So was I a product of some past rape? Invasion? Did it take suffering and death to create me? Questions like that weighed very heavily on my mind. And I was often plagued by like a reoccurring dream about a museum of war, which contained truths about reality so unspeakable that a strong gust of horror would blow anyone out the front door that even tried to enter. The second defining feature of my pre-antinatalism is that as far as back as I can remember, I have been genderqueer. And there is a certain amount of conditional antinatalist thinking attached to those feelings, at least there were for me. Why was I born like this? Why don't I have that? Why wasn't I born? Why aren't I the person that I think I'm supposed to be? And then it wasn't until I got older that I realized, of course, that there was a far more important question to be asked, and that was, of course, why be born at all? And I realized that that's what I was trying to ask all along, actually. So to work through these ideas and feelings as a far younger person, my way of dealing with it was to become obsessed with deformity and horror and monsters. And some of my most beloved characters at the time, the Phantom of the Opera, Frankenstein, all seemed to be making some kind of negative comment about procreation. Eric, the Phantom of the Opera, with his birth lamentation, and Frankenstein, who the doctor should not have created. These all seem to be saying something very negative about creating lives. But antinatal thoughts and feelings are generally not ones encouraged in children, particularly little girls. And as an ever-fattening, genderqueer, dyscalculic, who was obsessed with action figures and monsters and comic books, I had already picked a lot of fights and battles, so I did my best to suppress those notions. By 2010, I was 27 years old, and I had already been making YouTube videos for a few years. I was a Dragon Ball Z toy reviewer at the time, and I thank you, and I pretty much by accident discovered people talking about antinatalism around that time on YouTube, and the effect was like being struck by lightning. This was the subject that I had been waiting my entire life to find, and for the last 15 years, I have dedicated myself professionally, creatively, and academically to pursuing and contributing to the development of antinatalism in whatever way I can, through comedy, through sculpture, through filmmaking, through writing, podcasting, drawing, animation, you name it, everything but dance. I am dedicated to trying to communicate that the idea that we cannot do anything substantial about the existence of suffering is a lie. We can stop buying it. We can stop trying to give it to each other as some sort of gift, and we can end it gracefully and forever.
And with that, does anyone have any questions to ask? Yes.
Yeah. So this question is directed to Amanda. Yeah. I've never heard of the term antinatalism until today. So a lot of these ideas I have right now are very half-baked. But I wanted to ask this question from the standpoint of if I were trying to adopt your beliefs. Like if I were trying to just learn from you. The first thing that comes to mind is, for a great way to defend your position would be if there was a hypothetical world where the suicide rate was 50%. Like you're bringing in life into the world, and most of that life is choosing to end itself. Like that seems like it would be a world that we wouldn't want to live in. That sentience, maybe we would want to cease all sentience to exist. But then it got me thinking okay, well, actually the number of suicides in the U.S. is, and I looked this up, it's 50,000 in the U.S., right? And then coincidentally, we also have 50,000 U.S. vehicular deaths caused by cars. So then I wonder, could you make if I were to present to you a vehicular antinatalist movement, yeah. We should actually, the execs at Ford and the people on the assembly line shouldn't be making cars, because that's creating that, we're just worse off. That's causing the same number of deaths, suicides. How would you respond to that argument? Is that,
sure.
Should cars cease to exist?
Well, first of all, thank you for your question. I really appreciate it. I mean, listen, I think cars, there are a lot of things that we produce that have a realistic utility. We need cars. That's just something that modern life dictates. And it does come with risks attached to it. People do die in vehicular manslaughter. And it's horrible. So I would certainly say we should make cars as safe as possible. Don't buy from Elon Musk, that kind of thing. But I mean, I think that there are, we have to cut food with knives. I mean, there's a lot of knife deaths. So there's all kinds of things that do serve real utility for humanity, and those things are created for a purpose and they fill a need. I don't think that children fill those same needs. They don't have the same sort of necessity attached to them. And as far as suicide rates, I mean, I think that I am of the belief that our numbers on these things are a little bit skewed, right? Because we don't have the right to die. So this is 50,000 people in such dire straits that they're tragically, put in a position where they have to end themselves in really quite horrific ways. They don't have access to euthanasia. You can't just go to, if I need my appendix taken out, I can go to a doctor. Well, if I can afford a doctor, I could go to a doctor and have that done. But if I need to die, I'm left with a rusty spoon or something in order to do it. So, and I don't. If we had the right to die, I don't necessarily know that you would have this rush of people wanting to end their lives. But what I do think is that you would have people that all of a sudden had the freedom to plan for their entire life, not just this period of life in which, they're young, they're addicted, their life is reasonably good. It's something that they can count on, reasonably so. So I think having that freedom would change the game. And incidentally, if we were given that right, I think procreators would have some piece of an argument. They've at least created the fail-safe. They've at least created a world in which they're producing children and those children have an ability to escape through relatively quote unquote safe, kind means. The downside of that is you'd be producing a child that might want to die, and why would you do that? Why would you impose that risk? So I don't know if that answered your question. I so hope that it did, but I'm happy to keep going. Yeah. Thank you.
In the back?
Yeah, hi, thank you. So I think we can all agree that a world with less suffering is better, and that we should all try to optimize for less suffering. But I guess I'm questioning why antinatalism is the best vehicle for that enterprise, in the sense that it's presuming that there is knowledge of what non-being truly entails, and we don't have any way of knowing what true oblivion or non-being is, such that we know that it is intrinsically better than being, which is a blend. There is a scenario where non-being is an abomination, that puts modern lived suffering far beyond our wildest imagination, and that living is the only relief from this crazy non-being world. So I guess the question is, why are we focusing on antinatalism as the vehicle for wanting to reduce suffering versus some other kind of concepts like ethical altruism?
Well, yeah, thank you for your question. I do believe, a tremendous amount of contemporary antinatalism does come from a place of atheism, right? So the ideas about non-existence, the afterlife, these just don't exist. That's not to say that antinatalism has not been articulated from far more religious, perspectives. And actually, there's quite a considerable amount of research, evidence to support that those do exist, and there's a lot of research gaps, that I think need to be filled. But early Christianity, the Gnostics, had huge pieces of antinatalist thinking within them. So I do think there is some crossover between people adopting a similar view that might also believe that there may be some limbo out there where the non-existent are screaming to get in here, or there's something after death. Personally, I don't hold any of those views. But look, I think that there will be a future, right? And there's all of these competing philosophies about what that future is going to be. So antinatalism is one of the ideas that's in that marketplace of possible futurisms. And then you have, I named some of them, there really are some people who want us all to immigrate into a virtual reality. And there really are some people who want, insane life extension. Insane meaning forever life extension. And there are long-termists, and there are, Curtis Yarvins and Elon Musks and J.D. Vance who, want these ethno-states and whatnot. And I think what antinatalism, the reason why I hitched my horse to it, is because I think that even a miserable antinatalist world, which I sincerely hope is not what it ends up being, has the possibility of causing the least amount of suffering of all of these other possible futures gone wrong. The failure of some of these other competing philosophies is so tremendous. And next to antinatalism, which I believe is perfect prevention, it is the fail-safe, it is the only way that you are, by reasonable standards, able to say, I will not create suffering and death. At least it also ends. It has an end point. It doesn't have this forever point where everything, if we took the David Pierce route where we re-engineered the human genome to eradicate suffering. The chances of that going catastrophically wrong and not creating gradients of bliss hitherto unknown and creating gradients of suffering hitherto unknown terrify me beyond all measure. So again, I think that we should consider all of the possibilities, but I think that there's a very strong argument to make that antinatalism is the one futurism with the least, with the smallest blood footprint.
We have time for one more. Oh my God, too many. Who can raise it higher? You can go.
So you both have talked a lot about utilitarian arguments for your side. Utilitarian being a minimization of suffering. I think we could probably spend all day debating the minutia of like what angle of suffering minimization works the best. I wanted to set that aside also because you both fell back on your personal experience to sort of justify this utilitarian argument, which I think adds like subjectivity to that side. So for both of you, what are the best non-utilitarian arguments for what you support?
Keep the response tight.
Okay. As quickly as possible. It's a good question. I don't think that I presuppose utilitarianism. I'm not actually a utilitarian myself for a variety of increasingly boring technical reasons. I think the best argument for my position that doesn't assume any normative ethical view is just an axiology that says lives that are worth living make the world better, lives that are not worth living make the world worse, all else equal. The more good lives you have, the better the world is. The more bad lives you have, the worse the world is.
Isn't this utilitarian?
Oh, so maybe we're using the terms differently, but as I understand it, utilitarianism is the view that you're morally obligated to bring about the best outcome, where that is cashed out in terms of whatever produces the greatest amount of well-being. And I don't want to say that. There are people who have that view, and then you pair it with the claim that I just made, and then you get the verdict that people are obligated to have children, that they're doing something wrong if they fail to have children. The strongest pronatal arguments, I think, are utilitarian in that way. And I want to disassociate from that and say that it makes the world better, but in my view it's permissible to fail to have children, even if it means the world is comparably worse than it would otherwise be. That's as quick as I can be about that.
That was great, Travis. That was great.
It was a good technical question.
Yeah, that was good.
Do you want me to answer it
Yeah.
as quick as possible?
Yeah.
So, sorry, yeah. So I think that the position that you're describing is negative utilitarianism. I am a negative utilitarian. Interestingly enough, that like antinatalism academically has not generally been articulated through negative utilitarianism or utilitarianism. It is most often articulated through deontology. As far as I know, the world has not actually given rise to like a virtue ethicist antinatalist. I don't know if it's possible. It might be. Who knows? But yeah, I would consider myself a negative utilitarian. I think outside of academic circles, that is generally the most common normative view to take with antinatalism. But your question had to do with if you didn't put the value on suffering, right?
Yeah, what argument would you make outside of that? Right?
Yeah, then it would be sort of more about manipulation. I mean, that's just, like Julio Cabrera is like probably the most famous Kantian antinatalist. He's a Brazilian philosopher, and so his arguments generally have to do, like, he's famously anti-abortion. He's an antinatalist who's anti-abortion because you are manipulating that being, you're manipulating that life, and he doesn't think that you have a right to do that. That's in stark contrast with like a negative utilitarian antinatalist. So it basically the will of one over the other, whether it produces suffering or not. And that can have some very interesting, that can actually widen the scope of antinatalism to insentience in various respects too, as opposed to just arguments about hands off of sentience. Yeah.
Thank you, Amanda. Okay, so we're gonna get off this fire graphic, and we're gonna move on to closing arguments. So a lot of us in the room, maybe, are on the fence about having kids. And you guys are on either side of the argument, right? And I know, Travis, you've done a bit of work to figure out, whether you want kids or not. But more importantly, from your perspective, Travis, why should people in the room lean on, yes, I should have kids?
Well, I don't know if they should lean on yes, right? So I don't want to tell anybody that they should have kids if they don't want to. What I want them to lean on is looking at all of the options available to you, So not just that of having kids and what that would look like for you to the best of your ability. That's hard often to figure out, but you can approximate it. But all the other things you could do instead of having kids. And for many people, they will be happy or happier if they choose not to have kids. And for many people, I think they'll be plausibly happier if they have kids. And if enough people did that, I still think for a variety of reasons that are difficult to change about the way that our society is structured and sort of maybe evolutionary pressures that give people a desire to have kids, we would still have a lot of people making the choice fully informed or as much as possible to choose to have kids. So what you should do is talk to other people that have kids and ask them to tell you the truth about it. Make it clear that you're not going to stigmatize them if they tell you that they don't think it's a good idea. I had a philosophy professor as an undergrad. He was a logic professor, had nothing to do with natalism. And I was sitting in his office and he just came from time with his kids and he just asked me, I'm like 19 years old, do you want to have kids? And I was like, I don't know, maybe someday, a long time from now. And he said very casually, I love my kids, but if I could go back, I wouldn't do it. And I think that would rub a lot of people the wrong way, but I appreciated the candor and I was very interested in that. And I asked him about why that. And he just said, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of money. It's a lot of stress. There's a lot of sacrifices that you have to make. I love them deeply, but it detracted from how good his life was for him overall. Produced a net benefit because they had good lives, presumably. As good a life as you can have by being raised by a logic professor, but still, a good life. So you should look at those options. You should look at the realistic cost of having a kid, giving them the life that you want to have. You should look at one of the things that I didn't mention earlier was like the risks of having a kid and how that affects based on age. So like, since my partner and I waited so long, she was a geriatric pregnancy, which just means being over 35. It's not that old, but that's what that category is. So there's increased risks that you incur if you choose to try to have a child at that time. So in general, look at all the information available, talk to people that have had it, talk to people who you trust to give you an honest assessment of what it's like to have kids, and then decide if you want to do it. And if you do, great, I think it'll make the world better. If you don't, that's totally fine too.
All right. Amanda, same question to you. If someone's on the fence, why should they lean on having no kids?
Thank you, Sadia. Okay, first off, I want to say a huge thank you to our audience for listening to what both Travis and I have had to say tonight. Having children is a deeply emotional and personal decision, and antinatalism, for many, can be an extremely world-upending concept with an unthinkable one to consider. So once again, really, truly, thank you to everybody for listening to both of us. In the book, which you can find here, that I recently co-authored with the wonderful Finnish philosopher and bioethicist Matti Haira, we speak at length about a short story by Ursula K. Le Guin called The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. In this story, Omelas is the shining city on the hill, a perfect paradise in which everyone has plenty and everything is wonderful for all, except that in some lonely cellar living in filth and misery is one tormented child whose tortured existence is the necessary price that must be paid for everybody else's happiness. In our world, no one's happiness exists in a vacuum. The happiness of some always exists along with the misery of others, and no one needed either reality prior to being born. Even if all goes well, and your child is one of the lucky ones to live within the shining city and have it all, what about their children and their children's children? What joy could possibly be worth being responsible for the eventual child in the cellar paying the price? An antinatalist is the one who walked away from Omelas. Antinatalism is, as I've said before, the fail-safe. It is the Hippocratic Oath. It is the one way that you can truly assure that you will cause no harm. Your child will not suffer. Your child will not cause suffering. Your child will not want. Your child will not need. They will not die because they will not exist. Live your lives, but do not force anyone else to live one.
again, I had a lovely poll. Technical difficulties unfortunately occurred. So we're going to have to do screaming again. Okay, so on the question of whether we should have babies, if the folks agree with Travis, yes, we should have more babies, please scream. Okay, remember that, okay. All right, and for those who believe no, we should not have more babies, please scream.
Is it a tie?
Wait, can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Please raise your hand if you began this debate either undecided or on Travis's side. If you were one of those people and you did not change your opinion, please lower your hand.
Wait, can you say that again?
Yeah.
If you started undecided or on Travis's side and you are no longer there, please raise your hand.
You were convinced.
You were convinced. If you were convinced
By
Amanda.
Sam.
Yeah. Okay. If you were convinced, if you did not start with Travis,
Okay.
and you were convinced by Travis, please raise your hand.
Oh.
All right. We changed no one's mind. No, it's 2-2.
2-2. You guys did so well. Okay. Well, the winner is both of you guys. This guy. Yeah. I'm gonna do a shameless plug to our lovely thinkers today. Amanda Sukenick, there's a lovely QR code right there. She hosts a podcast, very popular in the antinatalist community. If you guys want to check it out, there's the QR code. It's called Exploring Antinatalism Podcast. Give you guys a beat to take the QR code. Okay. Also, we want to show the book.
There's also a QR code on the back of the
Lovely.
card,
Amanda
so.
comes prepared. There is her book is up front as well.
There's only about 5 copies, so
Go ham, you guys.
yeah, go ham. Yeah.
Travis also has a lovely book, which we have here.
Amanda's prepared. She brought my book.
Yes. Exploring the Philosophy of Death and Dying. There is a QR code if you guys want to purchase that as well. Any final words before we do a shameless plug of Talk and Taste?
Well, I'll do a shameless plug. So if anybody's interested in this, feel free to email me if you don't want to buy a physical copy, and I will send you a PDF of the published version. Rutledge is having us work on a second edition right now. We're supposed to submit it at the end of the year, so that'll be out in 2026. Also, I'm the co-author of a book called Wayne Animal Welfare. It's not about antinatalism or pronatalism, but it's about the difference in the quality of lives between various non-human animals. That's out with Oxford University Press this year, and that is open access, which means you can download it for free if you don't want to buy a physical copy. You can download it for free on the Oxford site. And lastly, I'm working on a book called Not to Be, on the Badness of Death and How to Feel About It. That's under contract with Oxford. Should be sent to them later this year, and then maybe out sometime next year. So keep an eye out for that.
So this is my shameless plug. So we have Talk and Taste Club on Instagram. If you guys haven't followed us, please do. I'm hoping to make this a thing. If you guys loved it or liked it a little bit, we want to make spicy conversations. We've been floating within our group some spicy topics, which I will not say here because they're a little too spicy. But if you guys have suggestions, we do have a suggestion box out in the back, and you guys can throw in some comments. And yeah, so follow us, and we hope to continue doing this. And thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for all the friends who have made this project their own. So I really appreciate you guys. And now we get really drunk. I made jungle juice, and there are chips to kind of keep us sober. out back. Everyone have fun. Thank you so much.